Shalom and welcome back to the Ministry of Yeshua. I'm glad you're here to learn the Word of God with us. Today we're diving into this week's portion, which is called Korach. We'll explore its wisdom, its beauty, and we'll see how it speaks to our lives right now. Together we'll look at passages from Numbers 16:1 through 18:32, which will connect us to 1 Samuel 11:14 through 12:22, as well as Matthew 26:13 through 24. And let's start with the Torah portion summary. So not long after the unpopular announcement that the generation that left Egypt will not be entering the promised land after all, a rebellion takes place. Korah, Dathan, Abiram, and some 250 Levites rise up against Moses. Korah and his rebels question the legitimacy of Moses' prophetic office. Doubt and discontent turn to contempt and rebellion. They challenge the authority of Moses and the choice of Aaron as the priest. They accuse Moses and Aaron of monopolizing the priesthood and hence the access to God. Korah and his followers distrust Moses. They wanted access to approach God themselves. And Moses answers their complaint by giving them exactly what they asked for. He gives them the opportunity to step over the line and enter the priestly service by attempting to offer incense with the morning sacrifice. Moses is vindicated by the earth's opening and swallowing the household of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Meanwhile, the Levites, whom Korah induced to rebel, try their hands at offering incense in the tabernacle. 250 men gather in the tabernacle court to offer incense. Each man holds a bronze censer for igniting his offering of incense. Fire comes out and consumes the so would-be priests. A plague goes out among the people, and thousands are struck dead. Aaron takes the incense of the tabernacle in a censer and runs through the camp, stopping the plague. The blasphemy of Aaron's staff definitely settles the question of Aaron's right to the priesthood. It is a sign of life, a token of the Aaronic priesthood. The Torah portion concludes with God speaking directly to Aaron, reaffirming the eternal role and function of the priests and Levites and the laws of tribute for their sustenance and maintenance. These laws include vows, tithes, the redemption of the firstborn, and priestly portions. So what exactly is Korach? Korach was the name of a prominent Levite. It is also the name of the 38th reading from the Torah. It comes from the first verse of this Torah portion, which says, "Now Korah, the son of Izhar, took action." And that's Numbers 16:1. This Torah reading tells the story of how Korah led an unsuccessful rebellion against Moses and Aaron. After thwarting the instruction, God confirms Aaron in the priesthood and provides additional legislation regarding priestly and Levitical privileges and responsibilities. And we'll talk about congregational leadership. So again, now Korah, the sons of Izhar, the sons of Kohath, the sons of Levi. Numbers 16:1. Have you ever been part of a church and congregation that split up? Have you ever seen a battle erupt against the leadership of a church or a congregation? If you have, you know that those kinds of things are not pleasant. Strife in the communities of faith leads to great hurt, bitterness, emotional trauma, and spiritual damage. The story of Korah in Numbers 16 through 17 vividly illustrates the story of a congregational rebellion. So we once knew a beleaguered Messianic rabbi who suffered through a congregational fracture once a year. By some strange coincidence, the trouble always befell his community during the week that the story of Korah was read from the Torah. After retelling the story of the Korah's rebellion in his epistle, Clement, the disciple of Peter, writes, "Our apostles also knew, through our Lord Yeshua the Messiah, that there would be strife over the office of congregational leadership." And that's in 1 Clement 44:1. So Clement was writing to the believers in Corinth who had recently forced their leaders to step aside in favor of new leadership. Young leaders with their new ideas had risen among the Corinthian congregations and forced their way into power by pushing out the old eldership. Clement protested the upheaval. He pointed out that the old leaders in Corinth had been appointed by the apostles. The epistle of 1 Clement is a long, eloquent rebuke of the Corinthian insurrection. Clement was right. There is always strife over the office of congregational leadership. That's just part of being a leader. No matter how worthy a leader may be, there will always be some who dislike him and try to influence others to join in on an effort to disallow him. Such was the case with Moses and Korah's rebellion. And we'll talk about Dathan and Abiram. With Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben. Numbers 16:1. Congregational insurrection usually begins with one or two disenfranchised people who have a grievance, real or imagined, against the leadership. They share their grievance with others who will listen. Korah had a gripe against Moses and Aaron. Like Moses and Aaron, Korah was also a Levite. He resented Moses for appointing Aaron as his sons to the priesthood and making the rest of the Levites their servants. He did not believe that this was God's command. He felt that Moses was abusing his position of leadership and indulging in nepotism by favoring his brother Aaron. He resented Aaron by being the big kahuna, or in this case, the big kohen. Korah insisted that all Levites should enjoy the privileges and rewards of the priesthood, and that the entire assembly of Israel was holy enough to serve in the tabernacle. Korah's attitude is very common among the Protestant believers today who feel that they are accountable only to God. Many believers view ecclesiastical authorities with suspicion and distrust and refuse to submit themselves to congregational leaders. Korah spread his spirit of dissent among his fellow tribesmen. It appears that most of the 250 men of renown who followed Korah were also from the tribe of Levi. Moses refers to them as sons of Levi in Numbers 16:8 through 10. However, Korah was also joined by three unlikely nobles, Dathan, Abiram, and On of the tribe of Reuben. Why would the Reubenites join Korah and the Levites? What did the dispute have to do with them? The Midrash Rabbah, a collection of ancient Jewish commentaries on the Torah, points out that Korah and the Reubenites were next-door neighbors. Korah was from the Levitical family of Kohath. According to arrangements for the tribal encampments, the Kohathites and the Reubenites both encamped on the south side of the tabernacle. And it says, on the south side shall be standard of the camp of Reuben by their armies, Numbers 2:10, and the families of the sons of Kohath were to camp on the southward side of the tabernacle, Numbers 3:29. The sages explain that this next-door neighbor relationship led the Reubenites into participation in the insurrection. A proverb says, woe to the wicked and woe to his neighbor. This applies to Dathan and Abiram, the neighbors of Korah. Dathan and Abiram were neighbors with a contentious man. That is why they were punished with him and were swept away from the world. Numbers Rabbah 17:5. This falls into the category of bad company corrupting good character. Being a neighbor to a wicked person is risky because you might be enticed to join him in his wickedness. Korah's initial grievances against Moses and Aaron had nothing to do with the Reubenites, but through the frequent conversation and the subtle manipulation of the ideas, Korah was able to draw his neighbors into his plan. So contention against leadership is contagious, and contagious people work hard to convince their companions to join their cause. Congregational rebellions often start in small study groups, special project committees, or volunteer kitchen crews where a single discontented layman can publish his gripe against the leadership and raise sympathizers. As disciples of Yeshua, we need to be wary not to fall into the trap of sedition. Paul warns us not to even listen to accusations against the congregational leaders except on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. And that's in 1 Timothy 5:19. Peter tells the younger men in congregations to subject to be subject to your elders. And that's in 1 Peter 5:5. The writer of the book of Hebrews instructs us to obey our leaders in willing submission. It says, "Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they keep watch over your souls as those who will give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with grief, for this would be unprofitable for you." Hebrews 13:17. Everyone needs to have someone to whom he's accountable. Whether it be a clergy, the elders, or other leaders, every believer, even a pastor, a rabbi, or a congregational leader, needs a spiritual authority over him. A person who does not submit himself to a spiritual authority is vulnerable and dangerous. Such was the case with Korah. Now we'll talk about an interesting story from the Talmud, which is called the Two Wives. Korah, the son of Izhar, and On, the son of Peleth, Numbers 16:1. The three chief Reubenites who joined with Korah were named Dathan, Abiram, and On. The Torah never mentions On. Again, after the Numbers 16:1-2, and Dathan and Abiram met a grim fate for their part in the rebellion, but On was apparently spared. The Talmud tells us a story to explain how the rebellion started and how it was that On was spared from judgment. According to the story of Korah's rebellion began at his wife's instigation. She resented Moses for assigning her Levite husband the lowly status of servant. She was jealous of the wives of Aaron's household who were married to the prestigious priests. So she began to subtly undermine her husband's loyalty toward Moses and Aaron. She would nag at him, saying, "See what Moses has done? He has made himself king and appointed his brother as high priest, and his nephews are priests. He orders everyone to set aside portions for the priests. Moreover, he made you and the other Levites cut off all your hair to make fun of you." Ironically, the name Korach, means bald. Every day when Korah came back from the assembly, his wife asked him what Moses had said, and then she would ridicule his teachings. For example, when Korah told her, "Moses taught us to attach threads of blue to the tassels on the four corners of our garments," she retorted, saying, "Moses is not hearing from God. He's just making things up. Go ask Moses if you need to attach blue threads to our garment that is completely made of blue fabric." She constantly criticized Moses and Aaron and the commandments. "Can't you see that Moses is making a fool of you and other Levites?" she would ask. When Korah finally decided to raise a rebellion, he thought it was his own initiative, but his wife had planned the idea in her head. The wife of On, the Reubenite, was just the opposite. When she found out that her husband had joined Korah's insurrection against Moses and Aaron, she took him aside and asked, "Why are you getting involved with these Levites? What business is it of yours? You are a student of Moses. If Korah deposes him, you will be a student of Korah. How does that improve your situation? As it is, you have gotten yourself into matters in which you should not be involved." Her husband explained that he had been swept away with Korah's rhetoric and taken a vow to join him in rebellion the next morning. "Do as I say, and I will get you out of your vow," she said. She fed him a rich meal and gave him plenty of wine so that he overslept. When Korah's men came looking for him, she sat in the doorway of the tent, brushing her hair, and did not let them into the tent to wake him up. So her husband On missed the entire affair without intentionally breaking his vow. The story is just a folktale, but it has an important lesson about how we influence our spouses and how we allow them to influence us. Proverbs 14:1 says, "The wise woman builds her house, but the foolish tears it down with her own hands." According to the Talmud, the wise woman is like the wife of On, but the foolish woman is like the wife of Korah. Korah took nothing. Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, took action. Numbers 16:1. The first verse of this Torah portion begins by stating that Korah and his followers took action. The Hebrew does not say what Korah took. The word action is supplied by the New American Standard Bible translators. The Hebrew text does not provide a direct object, leaving the sentence swinging in midair. Korah took. What did he take exactly? The New American Standard Bible translators suggested that Korah took action. Some commentators suggest that he took others captive with his words of sedition. Other interpretations indicate that he took on feelings of envy. And Rashi suggests that he took himself by setting himself aside from the community. All of these are merely suggestions. The Torah does not say what Korah took. Korah intended to take the leadership of Israel away from Moses and the priesthood away from Aaron. In the end, he ended up with nothing. Just like the scripture says, Korah took nothing. Those who take up subversion against their spiritual authorities end up taking nothing. Congregational disputes against leadership more often than not end with the continuous person or persons leaving the community angry and alone. Their bitterness isolates them from the larger community of faith, and their indignation eats away at their sense of peace. Though they tried to topple the leadership, they ultimately found themselves toppled. Almost without exception, their story could have had a happier ending if instead of trying to fight the authority, they had simply approached the leadership with their concerns, discussed them civilly, and then left the matters in God's hands. So who is the boss? They rose up before Moses together with some of the sons of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, chosen in the assembly men of renown. Numbers 16:2. You're not the boss of me. That's what we used to say when we were kids, and it was probably true. Your older brother or the bully on the playground wasn't the boss of you, even if he thought he was. Korah and his followers rose up against Moses and said, "You're not the boss of us." We played another game as children, where we would start a club or some other new institution. It began with a ritual, "I'm boss." The first child would say, "I'm second boss." The next would say, "I'm third boss," fourth boss, and so on. It went until the poor, unfortunate last child, usually the youngest present, would sigh with resignation and say, "I'm the sixth boss." Sixth boss? A lot of good that's going to be. In Numbers 16:3, we read that Korah and his followers assembled together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You have gone far enough, for all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourself above the assembly of the Lord?" They accused Moses and Aaron of taking the first boss positions. They questioned whether Moses had really heard from the Lord, and they refused his authority over their lives. In reality, Moses never said, "I'm first boss. I should be the leader of all Israel. I'm fit to be a leader." Moses never said, "I'm really something. I'm really a big somebody." His brother Aaron never said, "I'm second boss. I think I should be the high priest over all Israel. God should choose me to be the leader of Israel." Neither of them volunteered for their positions, submitted an application for their jobs, or campaigned for their offices. They were simply serving God in their positions to which He had appointed them. When Moses summoned the Reubenites, Dathan and Abiram, they replied with a stunning display of impertinence. They reversed the promises of Canaan by speaking of Egypt, the land of their servitude, as a land flowing with milk and honey. Numbers 16:13. So in other words, they were saying that they had been happier being unredeemed in Egypt. They rejected Moses' authority and asked, "You would also lord it over us?" Numbers 16:13. They denied his prophetic inspiration when they asked, "Would you put out the eyes of these men?" Numbers 16:14. And is to say, "Are you trying to pull the wool over our eyes?" Though Dathan and Abiram accused Moses of arrogance, he was actually the most humble man on earth. At the burning bush, he had argued with God against his appointments, and he only reluctantly stepped into the role of prophet and redeemer. He regarded himself as a nobody special. It was not that Moses had poor self-esteem. He simply had an accurate assessment of his own worth before God. Ironically, Korah, Dathan, and Abiram and their followers were the ones exalting themselves and claiming to be the big somebodies. Theirs was a posture of self-exaltation, and they rose up before Moses. Numbers 16:2. A rabbi once told us, "People point out faults in others that they themselves are guilty of to a much greater degree. We learn the same principle from the words of Yeshua. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? And that's in Matthew 7:3. It's true. The next time you hear someone gripping about somebody else's shortcomings, observe that the gripper has the same issues that he is pointing out in others. Better yet, the next time you hear yourself gripping about somebody else's shortcomings, realize that you are actually speaking about yourself. There's another childhood axiom that sums this up well. It says, "What you say is what you are." Regarding Moses, the Torah says he fell on his face, Numbers 16:4. The Master says, "Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted." That's in Matthew 23:12. So Moses was not putting on a fake or obsequious humility. He had a genuine sense of insignificance in the face of the Almighty. That is why he was exalted by God. When a man regards himself as a big nobody, he becomes angry with others who do not acknowledge his big somebodyness. He wants to be the first boss, God says to the big somebody. There is not a room in the universe for both you and me. God is the only true somebody and the only real boss. Only when a man utterly subjects his own will to God and says, "Not as I will, but as you will," in Matthew 26:39, is God able to inhabit him, work through him, and ultimately exalt him. Such a person was Moses, the most humble man of his generation. No need for an intercessor. Korah took a populist position, claiming that everyone in Israel should have the same rights and privileges as Moses and the priesthood. He said, "You have gone far enough, for all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourself above the assembly of the Lord?" It's Numbers 16:3. The gist of what he was saying is, we don't need Moses as God's spokesman, and we don't need Aaron to be our mediator. We can hear from God ourselves, and we can carry out the tabernacle worship ourselves. Korah and the Levites who followed him demonstrated a common folly. It is the seemingly logical idea that man may approach God and draw near to God on his own volition without the agency of any mediator. The Torah teaches otherwise. The Torah demonstrates for us that good intentions are not enough, neither is pedigree. Korah and his men were Levites. The story of the Korah teaches that if we want to draw near to God to serve him, worship him, and connect with him, we must do so through an agency of intercessor. In context of the temple, that intercessor was the priesthood. Without the mediation of the priest, Korah's followers found that they were standing too close to the fire. They had come too close to God. Ironically, this is the same thing that the Jewish anti-missionaries say about the gospel. An anti-missionary is an apologist for Judaism dedicated to refuting the claims of Christianity. Anti-missionaries often claim that Judaism does not require a mediator between man and God. There is no need for Messiah's atoning sacrifice or for his role as intercessor, because every Jew has direct access to God. The story of Korah's rebellion refutes the anti-missionary claim. If anything, the Torah affirms the role of priest and intercessor between God and Israel. From the tabernacle to the sacrifices to the priesthood to Moses himself, and the whole Torah seems to point toward the need for a mediator between God and man. Messiah is our mediator, a living tabernacle, a sacrifice for sin, a priest like Aaron, and a redeemer like Moses, all in one. And we'll talk about the three tests. He spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, "Tomorrow morning the Lord will show who is his and who is holy, and will bring him near to himself. Even the one whom he will choose, he will bring near to himself." Numbers 16:5. Rather than argue with the rebels, Moses proposed three tests that would settle this dispute with Korah, the Levites, and the Reubenites, and the assembly of Israel. We can refer to them as the incense test, the earthquake test, and the staff test. The incense test was meant to settle the question of whether the Levites and laymen could serve in the priesthood just like Aaron and his sons. Moses offered Korah's followers the opportunity to serve in the priesthood for one day. He told them to bring incense and censers into the tabernacle at the time of morning offering. If God received their incense very well, they could all be priests. But if God refused their incense offering, everyone would know that the service of the tabernacle was not open for the laity. The earthquake test was meant to settle the question of the authority of Moses. Korah and his followers claimed that Moses was not really hearing from God, that he has seized authority over Israel himself. Moses proposed a simple test to exonerate himself. If he was sent from God, he asked God to open up the earth beneath the tents of Korah and the rabbinities who were following him. The staff test was meant to settle the question of God's choice of Aaron for priest. Moses told the heads of all tribes to bring their staffs and leave them in the tabernacle overnight. The man whose staff had blossomed in the morning would be the man God had chosen to serve as his priest. Moses did not rely on political maneuvering, rhetorical challenges, or character assassination. He did not try to defend himself at all. Instead, he left the matter entirely in God's hands. This is difficult to do. When a person is challenged, criticized, or falsely accused, his normal human reaction is to hit back, defend himself, and try to convince others that he is in the right. It takes a person of great faith and spiritual maturity to simply leave the matter in God's hands. And this is the story of our friend. He says when his father was a pastor, he would often face angry and contentious people. At any given time, he was dealing with unhappy worship leaders, irate teachers, nasty parishioners, difficult board members, and a whole host of other conflicts that come with congregational leadership. His father never returned their criticism or unkindness. He would explain to the church family, I don't fight with people because we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against the spiritual wickedness in high places. And that's in Ephesians 6:12. He felt that conflicts within the kingdom were the work of the adversary. Therefore, his enemy was not his brother or sister in the Lord. Rather, his enemy was the devil. If I get pulled into a fight with other Christians, he would say, then I'm letting the devil win. Rather than fighting with his congregants and fellow Christians, the person's father took each problem to God in prayer and left their resolution with him. God honored his humility and never failed to work things out. The incense test, the fiery worship. Do this. Take censers for yourselves, Korach and all your company, Numbers 16:6. Korah and his Levite followers felt that Moses and Aaron were stifling the true worship with all the rules. They believed that anyone who wanted to should be allowed to worship God however they wanted. Moses agreed to let them try being priests for a day. The next morning, 250 men showed up with incense and brass censers to give it a try. Aaron was also present to offer incense. So the 250 men attempting to take over the priesthood fared no better than Aaron's sons Nadab and Abihu had when they attempted to offer unauthorized incense. The Torah says, fire also came forth from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering the incense. Numbers 16:35. So 250 bronze incense censers clattered to the ground. The incense offering of Aaron, however, was received. The Lord instructed Eleazar, the son of Aaron, to collect the bronze censers, since they had been offered before the Lord in the tabernacle. They had taken on a level of sanctity and could not be removed from the holy place. The Lord told Eleazar to collect the bronze censers and use them to make bronze plate sheeting for the altar of burnt offering. The extra layer of bronze sheeting on the altar would serve as a reminder for the generations to come that no layman who is not of descendants of Aaron should come near to burn the incense before the Lord. Numbers 16:40. Not only did Aaron survive the incense test, he also had an opportunity to demonstrate his incense burning skills to all Israel. When children of Israel saw that the 250 men had been killed, they blamed Moses and assembled against him. God punished them by dispatching a plague into their midst. Moses told Aaron to intercept the plague with incense. Aaron hurried out into the midst of the assembly where the supernatural plague was striking people down. He ignited the incense and he took his stand between the dead and the living so that the plague was checked. Numbers 16:48. The God of the Old Testament. Separate yourselves from among this congregation that I may consume them instantly. Numbers 16:21. So when the 250 men arrived in the tabernacle to burn incense, the glory of the Lord appeared and spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Separate yourselves from among this congregation that I may consume them instantly. Moses and Aaron understood that God was not referring only to the 250 men who had gathered against them, but to the entire assembly of Israel. He was suggesting destroying the whole nation. This was not the first time God made the offer to wipe out the nation and start over. When the children of Israel made the golden calf, he offered to wipe out the nation and keep his promise to Abraham through Moses' children. He made the same offer when the children of Israel heeded the evil report of the 10 spies. On both of these occasions, Moses interceded on behalf of Israel and averted the disaster. In Numbers 16, Moses again interceded on behalf of the nation. He and Aaron fell on their faces before God, and Moses cried out, O God, God of spirits of all flesh, when man sins, will you be angry with the entire congregation? Numbers 16:22. God relented and did not destroy the nation of Israel. A few verses later, the assembly of Israel rallies against Moses again, blaming him for the deaths of 250 men who attempted to burn incense. The Lord again says to Moses, Get away from this congregation that I may consume them instantly. Numbers 16:45. And again, Moses and Aaron prostrate themselves before God to beseech him for mercy. Perhaps it is stories like this that give the good God of the Old Testament a bad name. We sometimes contrast the frightening, austere God of the Old Testament with the loving, fatherly God of the New Testament. We imagine that prior to the death and resurrection of Yeshua, God was vindictive and ruthlessly harsh. He was always having people stoned and threatening to wipe out the nation of Israel. The cross of Yeshua mollified him, transforming him into a kinder, gentler God. Now he is gracious and forgiving, although most people will probably not summarize their theology in such simple terms. Those are the assumptions that many Christians take for granted. There's a serious problem with these assumptions. The angry God of the Old Testament is the same as the loving Father of the New Testament. The Bible tells us that God is eternal and unchanging. It says, For I, the Lord, do not change. Malachi 3:6. God declared it himself. The point of stories like that of Korah's rebellion is not to show us God's harshness, but rather to show us his graciousness and mercy. When God threatened to wipe out the entire congregation of the children of Israel, Israel had justly earned that punishment. When God accepted Moses' petition on behalf of the people, he demonstrated himself to be merciful and forgiving. We would not understand how merciful and forgiving he was being by sparing Israel if we did not first understand that Israel was deserving of the obliteration. Rather than a contrast to the God of the gospel, the message is identical. In the New Testament, humanity is depicted as worthy of obliteration and damnation. Rather than carry out the judgment, God willingly accepts the intercession of Yeshua, demonstrating himself to be the same gracious and forgiving God that he was in the days of Moses. And that's a very important lesson for everybody to know and remember. The earthquake test, there goes the neighborhood. If the Lord brings about the entirely new thing, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that is theirs, and they descend alive into Shul, then you will understand that these men have spurned the Lord, Numbers 16:30. Clement says that the envy brought down to Dathan and Abiram alive to Hades through the sedition which they excited against God's servant Moses. And that's in 1 Clement 4:12. So Dathan and Abiram accused Moses and Aaron of putting themselves in charge. Moses contended that this is not my doing, but that the Lord has sent me to do all these deeds. Numbers 16:28. Moses and the elders of Israel went out to visit Dathan and Abiram. They found their tents pitched next to the tents of Korah. By personally going to visit the insurrectionists, Moses hoped to inspire them to repent. The Master tells us that when someone is upset with us, we need to go to that individual personally and try to reconcile the matter. Likewise, when a brother or sister comes to us to settle a matter, we need to be quick to apologize and quick to forgive. Forgiving is hard. It takes a soft heart to do that. No one likes to admit to being wrong, and it can be difficult to let go of grievances. If we do not, our hearts will turn hard. Clement warns against having hard hearts. He says that if we do not soften our hearts and confess our transgressions, we will follow Korah, Dathan, and Abiram to Hades. It says, "It is better that a man should acknowledge his transgressions than that he should harden his heart, as the hearts of those were hardened who stirred up sedition against Moses, the servant of God, and whose condemnation was made manifest unto all, for they went down alive into Hades, and death swallowed them up." 1 Clement 51:3-4. Dathan and Abiram refused to repent and be reconciled with Moses. They chose to harden their hearts toward him. Moses warned everyone to back away from the tents of the insurrectionists before he announced the test. He called on God to perform an extraordinary sign by opening the earth beneath their tents. Immediately, a chasm opened beneath the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and their families plunged into the depth. The Torah says they and all that belongs to them went down alive to Sheol. Numbers 16:33. Sheol is the biblical Hebrew name for the place of the dead. For the most part, Sheol should be understood as a Hebraic synonym for death or the grave. But in the Septuagint, Sheol is translated by the Greek term Hades. That's Hades. In apostolic language, it is sometimes used as a synonym for the grave, but it's also used to represent a place of confinement or punishment where the souls of the wicked must remain until the resurrection and final judgment. The lesson is simple. Rebellion ends with a fast plunge to hell. The staff test. God's man for the job. The Lord said to Moses, "Put back the rod of Aaron before the testimony to be kept as a sign against the rebels, that you may put an end to their grumbling against me so that they will not die." Numbers 17:10. Korah and his followers questioned whether Aaron was really chosen by God to serve in the priesthood. To settle the question, Moses collected 12 staffs, one from the head of each of the 12 tribes. Each staff represented a tribe. The Hebrew word for the staff is mateh. It's the same as the Hebrew word for tribe. Aaron was the head elder over the tribe of Levi, so Moses took his staff and placed it with the others in the tabernacle before the Lord. The next morning he discovered Aaron's staff had sprouted and put forth buds and produced blossoms, and it bore ripe almonds. Numbers 17:8. The blossoming of the staff was a definite sign that vindicated Moses' appointment of Aaron as priest. It showed the Israelites that Aaron was chosen by God. Clement, the disciple of Peter, points out that Moses knew in advance that Aaron's staff would blossom. Moses did not have any doubts about whether Aaron was God's choice for the priesthood. Nevertheless, he went through the process of collecting the staff and doing the test for the sake of the people. Clement uses the story to demonstrate that sometimes congregational quarrels and squabbles with the leadership serve the same purpose. They are meant to publicly reveal God's purpose in a matter. As Clement retells the story of how Aaron's staff bud, he adds several extra biblical details that he might have gleaned from the apostolic tradition. For example, Clement tells us that Moses bound the staffs together and sealed the binding with the signet rings of each of the 12 tribal leaders so that there would be no suspicion of hoaxing. Moreover, he shut the doors of the tabernacle and sealed them with the signet rings as well, so there would be no possibility of anyone entering in the night. Clement's retelling it as the follows. So he says, when rivalry arose concerning the priesthood, and the tribes were contending among themselves as to which of them should be adorned with that glorious title, he commanded the 12 princes of the tribes to bring him their rods, each one being inscribed with the name of the tribe. And he took them and bound them together, and sealed them with the rings of the princes of the tribes, and laid them up in the tabernacle of witness on the table of God. And having shut the doors of the tabernacle, he sealed the keys, as he had done the rods. He said to them, Men and brethren, the tribe whose rod shall blossom has God chosen to fulfill the office of the priesthood, and to minister unto him. And when the morning was come, he assembled all Israel, 600,000 men, and showed the seals to the princes of the tribes, and opened the tabernacle of witness, and brought forth the rods. The rods of Aaron was found not only to have blossomed, but to bear fruit upon it. What do you think, beloved? Did not Moses know beforehand that this would happen? Undoubtedly he knew, but he acted thus that there might be no sedition in Israel, and that the name of the true and only God might be glorified, to whom be glory forever and ever. Amen. And that's in 1 Clement 43:2-6. After settling the question of the right to the priesthood, the Torah goes on to delineate between the rights and responsibility of Levites and the priests. Numbers 18 contains extensive legislation regarding priests and Levites. The story of Korah's rebellion has many valuable lessons. It teaches us to avoid conflict with our spiritual leaders. It teaches us spiritual leaders to rely on God rather than fighting back. It teaches us that everyone needs to be accountable to someone. It teaches us that we must not question the authority or reliability of the Torah of Moses, nor should we question the Aaronic right to the priesthood. And most important, it teaches us that we must submit ourselves to the Messiah, the prophet like Moses, and the high priest over God's household. And that's about it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If this message blessed you, if you learned something new, please like the video and subscribe. It helps the message to reach more people who need encouragement and truth. And feel free to follow our Instagram, linked in the comments for daily inspiration, as well as daily prayers. May God bless you and keep you. May He shine His light on you and be gracious to you. May He turn towards you and grant you peace. Grace and shalom to you all.